coming up this week, we've got Ron Peters. He's going to be joining me to talk about his synth collection. Collecting synths for over 40 years. He's got an amazing array of gear, including a very nice DX1. So we'll be talking about how he got into collecting them, or why he doesn't even see himself as a collector. He's a user of synths, and we're talking about those, maintaining them, that kind of thing, which are his favourites, which he's sold, and all sorts. So it's going to be a fascinating chat. So let's get straight to Ron. Peters, welcome to the show.
How you doing, Ian? Good to be here.
It's brilliant to get you on the show because I think we connected via the Vintage Synth group on Facebook, and you've got an amazing collection, and that background looks so realistic. It looks like you've got a great background, one of those Zoom backgrounds of a synth setup.
Yeah, I should screen capture it and use it for Zoom.
Yeah.
This is all real. It's all real.
Yeah, it looks brilliant, but yeah, it's nice to see it's all real. So what I thought we'd do tonight is I wanted to talk to synth users, collectors, enthusiasts about their collections and which are your favourites and that kind of thing, which you have. But I thought before we'll do that, just dive into a bit about you. So how did you get into music? And is this your full-time gig, or is this like a hobby?
Well, that's an interesting story. Basically, I started playing the trumpet in the second grade in elementary school here, in Denver, Colorado, here in the States. And before I actually was playing the trumpet, see, I come from a family of musicians. My grandmother was a concert pianist and a music teacher. My mom was a concert pianist and an opera singer and a music teacher. My dad played in the Army marching band, and my great-grandfather was Ralph Dixon, the big band leader.
Right.
The list goes on forever. So it's kind of a no-brainer that I ended up doing music, but my grandmother started giving me lessons on the piano before I was in kindergarten. Basically one finger, poke, 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 And believe it or not, I still have that little songbook we started with. But it progressed, trumpet in the second grade, and then eventually, 1979, I got my first synthesizer. And you'll laugh because it was a Casio VL tone. Technically a real synthesizer because you can actually make your own sounds on it. Barely, but you can. Now, my first real professional synthesizer comes with a new story. It was 1984. And every year our family would always hop on the Amtrak train, go visit family back east in Illinois here. And one year, I guess my grandmother decided that I needed, she wanted to keep me enthusiastic about music and all that as I was becoming a teenager and all this. So we went to a good longtime friend of the family's music store in Galesburg, Illinois. It was called Gamble Music Company. And we walked out of there with the Kawai SX240 synthesizer, brand new, and a couple of stage speakers and an amp for them. And that's where it literally started, where I was a bit more serious about music. And I still have that keyboard. It's right there.
That's brilliant.
And then, of course, over time, the very next year we went back to Illinois and ended up with my K3, which is another Kawai, brand new, still have it. And between those two, and then now I'm making money, so I was eventually able to buy an RX-5 drum machine.
Oh, I've still got mine up over there.
There you go. That's a great drum machine. And through the second-hand market, I picked up a Yamaha MT44 4-track cassette recorder. With the whole little setup that all these pieces you could buy separately to make this into a kind of a mini home professional, not quite, studio. And I started recording music that way because your only sync with the tape was just Simply Sync or an FSK tone at the time. And FSK tones, if you stop, you have to go clear back to the beginning and start over. There's no jump to the middle. But that little cassette recorder recorded the first track I ever, song that I ever made. that ended up being broadcast on true FM radio stations. And that song was called Prisoner of the Wind, and that was in 1985. And they played that on KBCO in Denver, Colorado for years because they were variety, and they definitely were variety because that was not your Donald Fagen or jazz or ragtime or pop or any of that. And in time, like if you fast forward to today, and where you see all the keyboards behind me, and this is scaled down. There used to be almost 80 keyboards in here.
Wow.
But a lot of people who know me know that I am not a museum. If I have a keyboard, it gets used. If I have a keyboard that's not getting used for a long period of time, I'll trade it or sell it for something I can use. I had a CS80 in here, and I felt I wasn't using it enough, so I sold it.
Right, that was going to be one of my questions, actually, because do you consider yourself a collector or a user? And I think some people collect them and some people use them. So you're in that user category, aren't you? So you're not getting them just for the sake of it.
I'm a user that appreciates the vintage stuff, but because I'm a real musician and a user and a recording artist and a recording engineer, to me, it's a matter of what keyboard makes the sound I'm looking for. I don't care if it's a little Portasound or a Casio or this DX1 right here. If they make the sound I'm looking for, that's what I'm going to use. I've had some rare keyboards. I had a Oberheim OB1, which was pretty rare. Of course, the CS80. I had the complete octave cat kitten setup with the cat stick. Hardly used them, so they went bye-bye. They're in a better home. These are all musical instruments. They were made to make music, not sit there and go ooh and ah and collect dust.
Yeah. So just take, for example, the CS80 then. So what made you think, well, okay, this is not for me. I can get rid of that and buy something else with the money?
Well, the interesting thing about the CS80 is that it's probably the most incredible performance, real live keyboard player performance synthesizer ever. There's a lot of great keyboards out there that play live very well. But if you truly understand the CS80 and the thought behind it, and I have a video on YouTube where I made an example of this, because most of the time you see a video for a CS80 and I was playing a funk line or something, and that's cool, but it doesn't show off what the CS80 can really do. And this is a keyboard made in the late 70s. So I made one, and the entire song is just the CS80. There's no drum machine, there's no keyboards. Well, you can't hook keyboards to it anyway. They don't have MIDI. They don't have any external control, really. And this whole song plays through with different sounds, sound switching, this and that, and it's seamless, because that's how these keyboards were made. Now, as awesome as that is, I do most of my work in the studio recording things. We do play some live gigs, but that's kind of secondary, here. So eventually, when the CS80s hit about $70,000 in value, US dollars, which I don't know, that'd be in British pounds, probably about 100,000.
Yeah, not far off the same issue, but 100,000, yeah.
I realized, these prices are going to start plummeting, and they did. But I sold it just before that happened. I got really lucky on that. I sold it for 65,000 American dollars, and it literally paid off half of my mortgage on my house. So that was a smart thing to do.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the other thing with these synths, I guess you start to get these vintage synths that they take some maintenance, don't they?
Well, now my CS80 was the same one that was featured in the Centaur episode of Synth Wizards that featured the CS80. Right. That's the same one. My friend Sam, they're right up the road from me. I go there all the time and help them do tech work when they need extra hands, things like that. And so if you watch that Synth Wizards episode, you get the full story behind it, how they got a hold of it, plugged it in, and poured out smoke. And they worked on it. Then they took a trip to California, and they took it with them and took it to Yamaha, and Yamaha fixed it. And then they brought it back, and then Syntar fixed the remaining little things that needed, like the key guides weren't right, and then the calibrating, recapping, and all of that. And they did such a good job that I had that probably 4 or 5 years. I had that CS80, and the first time I set it up in the studio here, I turned it on, let it warm up, found that when you tune it to the B or the middle C or A, depending on which way you want to look at it, so it matches, pitch, was right in the center of that tuning knob. And in 5 years, I never touched the tuning again. That's how good they fixed it. So these people think, the CS80s always go out of tune and this and that. Well, yeah, you've got one that's old and needs work. But if you take the time to get all that work done correctly, it'll last another 40 years before you're having those issues again.
Yeah. So, but I suppose this is something you've got to factor in when you're buying old synthesizers, that you are going to have to maintain them, and you need to know the right people to get them repaired.
The flip end of that is the Moog memory Moog. And I don't like to talk bad about Moogs because I have a Moog sitting behind me in that, you see that rack behind me. That's a mini Moog in a rack case in that rack. It was made by Studio Electronics. And the mini Moogs are really good. Now, the memory Moog, that's a whole different story. It's an incredible sounding beast. It's like having 6 mini Moogs in one box and being polyphonic. But they're extremely unreliable. And a lot of people argue about that. But I've had 2 of them, and I've repaired 16 of them myself. And you can make them as future-proofed as you can, but they will always eventually have a problem. And that's what comes back to the maintenance. Now, most of the time, the problems aren't a huge thing if you're a tech and you understand them. A lot of times a VCA chip or something will go out and you lose a voice, or silly little things. But memory Moogs for decades were always known for being unreliable. And the keyboardists for the band Styx from the 70s and 80s, they toured with 3 or 4 of them, just because they wanted to make sure they always had one that worked.
Yeah.
Now,
I always loved that one because I remember Jan Hammer playing one. I always thought that they looked so cool with him on that.
Right. Now, I have a friend. He's in the groups. You've probably seen him. His name is Jareth Lackey. He is probably the best tech around for fixing Moogs and fixing them right. So if I was ever going to have another memory Moog, I've gotten rid of mine, I'd make sure he went through it completely, because at least then it would be somewhat reliable. But
yeah,
that's a debate that's kind of like the Behringer debate people have, and some people think, they're great, they're not as bad as I make them out to be. Well, I've been through 16 of them and 2 of my own. That's 18 memory Moogs that all failed multiple times.
Yeah, and I guess there's not that many of them around to start with. They weren't massive selling.
And they're worth a lot of money now, too. Even with the prices being down on keyboards right now, I think a decent working memory Moog is still going to cost you $8,000 to $10,000 US.
Yeah. So, the synths that you've got now, then. So, when you get, first of all, let's say, how do you come about getting synths? So you want something like a CS80 or a memory Moog or DX1, which we'll come back to, but how do you track them down?
Well, that depends. Being a tech and being in music for so long, since the 70s when I was a little kid, and it depends on things. My main recording, if I'm going to make a song, it usually ends up, the main pieces of gear are almost always a Matrix Brute, the OBX8, which I bought to replace my OBX-A for the same reliability factors we previously talked about, RX5 drum machine and a Lindrum mixed with a Roland TR-8S and a Digitac. I literally mix old and new and all this. And the new stuff, I buy a new, or if I find one that's like somebody bought and they're selling it because they didn't understand it, sure, you can save a little money. Now, the vintage stuff, it's always a different story. The DX1 has a really cool story. When we get into that, I'll tell you that story. You'll love it. But a lot of times, being a tech, I look for the broken ones, the keyboards that don't work. Because most of the time, the vintage ones, like an old cars are easy to fix. The vintage ones, same thing. As long as you get electronic parts, you can always get that. Keys can be problematic depending on the keyboard. Like if you had an MS-10, well, the keys used in that, the plastic keys, they were used in the MS-10, the MS-20, they were used in the Moog Rogue, the Moog MG1, and almost all the old vintage Teisco keyboards. And the list goes on. Trouble is, every keyboard that used that style of key, so if you're looking for a replacement key, every keyboard that used those are sought after today. There's no basket case ones that nobody wants. And as such, there's no spare keys. I have a couple of Teisco what are they, the 100P, they're a little preset deal, and one of them had a broken top C key. And I've got a regular C key stuck in there, so there's a little hole in it, but it works because that's all you can find.
Yeah. I've got a Gen SX 1000 down there. It's got a broken top C, which has been broken since 1988, but I've never been able to find the key to fit into it. And
it's possible that might use the same key as well. If I remember right, for kits, I do believe somebody had to make that.
Yeah.
So could be wrong with that, but see, there was several. I've got a friend of mine you've probably seen him in the Facebook forums. His name is Mark Jenkins, and I've done some music with him in the past. I just purchased an extremely rare drum machine from him. It's kind of it's more than drums. It's kind of an accompaniment drum machine, if you will, because it has bass and rhythm and all this. And it was made by a company that you might be familiar with in the UK. The company was called Clef, like bass clef, treble clef. And it's known as the Bandmaster. I think that was the name of it, but it's so rare I can't remember the name of it. It's not common. But same story. It was a kit and it doesn't work. So hopefully when it gets here I can get it functioning again, because one of the things I do like is the oddball gear, the weird stuff.
Yeah.
Like I found a Crumar Bit 99. I was all over that just because it's unusual. And for a while I was restoring one of only two synthesizers made by the Kinetic Sound Systems company called the Spectrum.
Oh, yeah. I remember seeing that in the Keyfax book. Yeah.
I had that sitting here in this studio, and then because Sam at Centaur had gotten a hold of it, and I knew the guy who has the other one, but he passed away, and we don't know what happened to that keyboard now. And when we had, without his, it needed both of us to have everything we needed to get both of them to work again. And I had the one here making sound, but it wasn't any kind of melodic sound because the EEPROMs. It was quite literally the first commercial waveform-based synthesizer. And unlike over time in the years, Kawai started out with a K3, and you could program 32 harmonics, and the K5 is 128. Then they came out with the K5000. We thought, oh, this is crazy, 512 harmonics you can program. Well, if you go back to 1979 when that Spectrum synth was being developed, it can be programmed for a whopping 1,024 harmonics. And you could hook up to 4 remote keyboards to it to play up to 4 different parts multi-timbral. It was an interesting thing, but we decided in the end to sell it to EMAP, however you say that, the museum in Philadelphia. Yeah. So it's in its proper home, because even if we got it working, what are we going to do with it? It really should be on display for everyone to see.
Yeah, and having those skills to be able to fix it. I think we would talk to Sean Fallon on an earlier show. He was kind of almost, you could get 2, fix 1, keep 1, and it's a good way of funding that sort of enthusiasm for the synths.
I bought a DX9 just for the music rest. Because this DX1 was missing. That was the only accessory it was missing, and it's the same music rest. It pops in those little holes in the back.
So let's talk about the DX1, because That is such a rare synth. I mean, I'm a big fan of the DX. My DX100 is on the top shelf there, which I got when I was 15 from my grandparents. And the DX7 was the thing that I always wanted because I saw the musicians playing them on TV.
Right.
But I heard about the DX1 and obviously later read about it. So how did you come to getting that?
Well, now this is the fun story. If you go back to, well, I'll give you a little background first. Yamaha made 140 DX1s. And their intent was to impress. It wasn't meant to be made in massive quantities and just sold like, like crazy. That's what the DX7 was for. Now this is 1983. So they decided that they would choose 140 of the top Yamaha dealerships on the planet. Japan, UK, United States, Canada, wherever. And each one would get one DX1 to put in their display to help sell the DX7 and the DX9 and so on. The DX5 didn't come out until like a year or two later, which was weird. But anyway, so, I was born and raised in Denver, Colorado. And there was this music store that I always went to when I got my first Kawai keyboard. And they had their big Yamaha setup in there with the, DX1, DX7, and drum machine, the RX21s and all that. And they had stanchions around the DX1. They didn't want you touching it. Sign right on, do not touch, because it was all clout is what it was. Because they were the only #1 Yamaha dealer in the entire state of Colorado. So, at any rate, the manager of that store was a real good friend of mine. Even though he's older, we were good friends. Musicians, that kind of thing. And I was in the store messing around with some of their other keyboards. They have the Akai AX80 in there and others. And he said, come here, take a look at this. And I looked like, yeah, it looks like Star Trek. He pulled the stanchion and I said, play with it, mess with it, because he trusted me not to mess it up, anything. So I'm messing with it. And he got his Polaroid out and took a picture of me playing it and gave me the picture. And now you can prove that you played the DX1, which is, in American dollars, I think they had their price tag on it was around $14,000. And back in the early 80s, that's a lot of money.
Yeah.
I think that translates to like, I don't know, 80, 90,000 today or more. So anyway, there's some of the background. And I have this picture. And then, so you fast forward a few weeks, I go in and the DX1's gone. Where'd it go? And he told me this girl came in who was a music teacher, teaches music out of her home, said she bought it because she wanted to attract more students, because, synthesizers is a big thing now in the 80s. So she bought this DX1 and took it home with her. So anyway, I'm like, oh, okay, that's cool. She must be rich. I never thought much of it for years, for decades. Now, fast forward to 2019. I'm in a Facebook group, probably, maybe not the largest, but it was a big group. There's over 100,000 people in it. And this girl joined the group and posted that her mom had to go into a nursing home and all this, and she's selling all her stuff, had to get rid of the house, the usual story. And she needed more info about her mom's DX1 synthesizer. By this point in time, I had learned quite a bit about the DX1s, and what they were, being the keyboards and all that. And my friend he was the admin of that group, immediately took her post down and messaged her privately and told her to contact me because I would tell her the real truth and what it's worth and all that. So he did, and she contacted me, and I told her, well, here's the deal. At that point in time, only maybe 5 DX1s had ever changed hands. You just don't find them for sale. No. And, well, the pandemic changed that. All of a sudden, a few of them came out of the woodwork because people needed money. But anyway, so I told her it's this and that, and we FaceTimed so that I could tell her, push this button, check that, just to see if everything's working, the battery voltage, even though it's not a great indicator, you can tell if it's dead or not. So she did all that, and I noticed, this DX1, it was absolutely immaculate. It was mint. And she told me the story. You know, her neighbor was a carpenter, and her mom was a music teacher, and she had to make this cabinet in her home so that they could slide it out, in and out, you know, keep it protected and all this. So she asked me, well, what's it worth? I said, well, of the ones that sold, the most expensive one had all of its accessories, everything. They came with 5 ROM cartridges and 3 RAM cartridges. And they came with the music rest. They came with 2 modulation pedals and 2 sustain type pedals. And the books and things, of course. And she said, oh, I don't think she has any of that. It's just a keyboard. I said, okay, well, the one that sold with everything sold for $17,000 back. The last time I saw it, that sold probably, I don't know, 2015 or 14, somewhere in there. And I told her there was a basket case that didn't work. It was broken buttons, all that. It sold for $7,000. So I told her, your keyboard at minimum for parts is worth $7,000. I said, now obviously it works, so it's worth more than that. But without the accessories or the factory road case they came with, you know, I told her it's probably worth about $10,000 at that time, 2019. And she's like, well, how would I go about selling that? I said, well, I tell you, you know, if you choose to do so, I would buy it from you for the $10,000, and I'll come get it. Because I told her I always wanted one. I played one as a kid, you know. So we FaceTimed a little more. This was over a period of several days, but she was under the gun to get things sold. So she's like, you know, come get it, but you got to be here by Wednesday. We're talking on a Monday. So I asked her, where are you at? She's like, Denver. What? Really? So I go to Denver and I asked her, did your mom buy this from Villa Music, later known as MIDI Music Center? She's like, yeah. I showed her the picture. And she's like, holy crap. So fun.
Wow.
So I ended up with the keyboard I played as a kid.
That's fantastic.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah. And it's such a beautiful instrument as well. I mean, we the DX7, as some people hate them, some people love them. I love them, but that membrane thing set the trend for the 80s. But the DX1 is not like that, is it? It's
well, you mentioned
control.
sound. A lot of people hate the sound, and I never liked the sound either. And I will be honest with you, I just always shied away from DX keyboards because they always sounded tinny and metallic and clunky to me, you know. Except for that piano sound and that one bass sound that everybody used. Those were pretty good sounds. So of course, now with this, had it for a while, still, okay, there's that piano sound. And then thinking, you know, I don't want to get rid of it, so I'm going to make it sound good, one way or another. So I delved into it. And because it has the displays on it for programming, instead of menu diving, it was a lot easier. And in the end, I discovered that the factory presets all suck. And that's what ruins their reputation on sound, because they are fully capable of making some really great sounds. And I was like, I was so blown away. This was just a few weeks ago that I ended up making a video and putting it on YouTube to demonstrate this. And all I did was put a little reverb on it and hooked up the sustain pedal, and I just started playing these big chords and some notes, and had it programmed so that the back sound would come in after the fact and all this. In fact, you can hear it.
Yeah.
That's an amazing sound that you wouldn't normally expect to hear from a DX. Now, granted, the DX1 had better components inside, so it's a lot cleaner in sound than the DX7, but it's not that far off. DX7 sound good, too.
And of course, it's a dual synth, isn't it? So it's got 2 DX7 engines in it.
That's the trick to the sound coming in later. You're hearing the one sound when I play it, and by holding the keys, that other sound comes in afterwards. And if I MIDI it to that DX5 above it, now you got 4.
Yeah, I mean, it's such. I mean, it's got the wooden sides on it and everything. It's a piece of a work of art in itself, isn't it? Compared to the sort of the latest.
This wood on it is Brazilian rosewood, which is endangered now. You can't get it anymore to make anything out of.
Yeah. And it is a lovely synth. And like you said, the DX gets a bad reputation, but I guess the factory presets were trying to create, they're trying to create a tuba and a trombone and an oboe and a clarinet, and that's the
the story of Yamaha's FM trying to sell it. They had to make sounds that sounded like instruments, and back in the 80s, that was a thing. That was a big thing. All the decades of people trying to make a keyboard sound like a real acoustic piano. I'll never forget that.
Yeah, but of course now we want the synths for electronic sounds, and FM's pretty good for that.
Probably people want vintage so much.
Yeah, I mean, I've told this on a few shows before, but I wanted that DX sound. I got the DX100, and I couldn't work out why it didn't sound like Duran Duran or whatever I was seeing on the chart programs at Top of the Pops in the UK. We had, I didn't sound like the Pet Shop Boys, but little did I know about music production.
Your part comes in. A lot of people say, I want a keyboard that sounds like that. Well, they don't understand that the keyboard's supplying the initial sound, but they might be running it through a flanger or some effects and reverb and delay, all these other, distortion pedal for that matter. And that's what gives a lot of these songs that unique sounds that you hear, because the basic sound started with that certain keyboard, but you got to have all this other gear to make it sound right.
Yeah. And in fact, it's a bit of a DX corner that you've got there, isn't it? Because the DX5 itself is rare enough, but you've got DX1 and a 5, and then is that a 27 above it?
That's a 21. I picked it up for free because it didn't work. And it actually did work. The display was bad. And there's a DX9 sitting around here somewhere, and I think I still have the DX7 somewhere, I think. I try to keep the Yamaha and the DXs together because after that little discovery about making your own sound on it, it just makes sense to keep them right next to each other because there's a lot you can do with that.
Yeah.
Like on the camera here on my left is all my Teiscos. I have every Teisco synthesizer they made, all of them. And they're all grouped together for the same. It looks cool, but the real reason is you can play them that way. It's really inspiring when you can do that.
And did they the same company that became Seal?
I'm sorry?
Right. Did they become Seal? The brand rebranded as Seal. I mean, they rebranded as something else, didn't they?
Yeah. That's an interesting side note. Kawai bought out Teisco in I think it was 1867 or 69. But they kept the name around for a long time, probably mostly because of the guitars. Teisco guitars, a lot of them are pretty sought after. But the synthesizers, they had different ones, and they had a lot of PA gear, microphones, all kinds of stuff for decades under the Teisco name. But the last keyboard to carry the Teisco name was the SX240, and I have Tom Holkenborg's Teisco branded SX240 here now. I bought it from him long ago. And he's one of the YouTubers known as Junkie XL, and I'd always wanted to complete the Teisco branded, all these, so I bought that one from him. Once they came out with the K3 in 1985, they dropped Teisco completely as a name.
Right. Yeah. So you like to. So what's the criteria then for you choosing your synths? Is it just what you come across and you think's interesting, or do you have certain brands that you like?
Oh, it's a matter of what I find that I like. I don't care what the brand is so much. I bought I like my Matrix Brute so much that I bought the Mini Brute 2, which is just a little baby, mono synth. And I ended up realizing that it made all the sounds I ever used on my Jupiter 8. Because I only used Jupiter 8 for bass and solo, lead sounds. Never really needed it for chords because I used the Oberheim for that. And that enabled me to sell the Jupiter 8. And the Jupiter 8s are worth quite a bit of money, so that worked out. And it actually, on the main lead sound I use it for in live gigs, it's identical to the Jupiter 8 sound I use. I had to program it, but it's just knobs, so that's easy. But it had the added benefit of polyphonic aftertouch on that little keyboard. Mm-hmm. Like that, just put it right over the top. As much as I love the Jupiter 8, that one just all of a sudden kicked its butt on that lead sound.
And of course, then you sell the Jupiter 8 and you can buy a lot more in its place.
Exactly right. And the money went into other stuff that I needed for the studio here. But yeah, if I keep an eye out on the internet like most people would, but I also keep an eye out at the various music go-round stores. Now, here in the States, there's a chain of music stores called Music Go Round. There's a plug for them. They're kind of like I don't know how you explain it. Part of it's kind of like a pawn shop, but it's only musical instruments. There's no guns or jewelry or anything like that, and their tools, and TV sets. But they sell a lot of new things too. New lines that they carry. Like on stage, you want a mic stand or something with brand new ones. But in my travels, because my main work, you asked me earlier if I did this full time, and as much as I'd like to, that's coming. But right now, my main focus is my Searchlight company. We manufacture, rent, and sell the Hollywood-style searchlights that you see in the sky.
Right.
And we also do big jobs. We go out to Vandenberg Space Force Base because we light up the rockets when they do nighttime launches, things like that. So there's good money in it for now, but I've done that for 40 years, over 40 years. Well, about 40 years. And we're currently at the point now where we're going to sell the company, and that's when we go into the music full time, do that, record people, make our own, whatever. But as a result of that, I travel all over the United States quite a bit. So I know where all the good music go-rounds are on the way. I've got a lot of good deals at the different music go-round stores. The mixer I'm talking to you through is that rack mixer back there. It's 48 input rack mount mixer, stereo on every channel. And I got it for $150 at a music go-round. It's like the perfect mixer for a keyboardist.
Yeah. So you find that, so if you're looking for synths, it's just a question of keeping your eye open. There isn't sort of one particular place to go.
Right, exactly. I might find a Korg MS-10 in one place, and the next day all they got is a bunch of Casios, or another place might have a Korg M1. You never know. In fact, I used to have by serial number Elton John's Rhodes 88 electric piano, and I didn't know it when I got it because I was in a music around where I grew up in Denver. There's 3 music arounds there. But they had this Rhodes, and I recognized it was on the floor with the lid on, like a road case. And I asked the guy about it because you could see the sideways cut in the case, which is indicative of a Rhodes instead of a regular road case. And I asked the guy, "Was that Rhodes for sale?" And how would you know that was a Rhodes? You could see it. He said, "Well, it's got issues." And he opened it up, and you could hear something rattling inside, and some of the keys, the whole section of keys would not go down. And I knew exactly what the problem was because we had this problem when I was in high school with the Rhodes we had in high school. How much you want for it? $450. Really? Here you go. I got it out, put it in my van, pushed the plastic lid off because they just pop off, fished out the bar for the sustain pedal from under the keys. And that was it. There was nothing wrong with it. And like 2 years later, I got to thinking about my trumpets, my flugelhorns, brass instruments, because most of the time you can look up the serial number and see when they were made, and all of that. I said, what if you did the Rhodes? Because I didn't know that much about Rhodes at that point in time. So I punched it in and all this, and sure enough, it came up everywhere that was originally sold to Elton John. It was used on the album that had Rocket Man on it, whichever songs had the Rhodes instead of the real piano, And I was like, that's pretty cool.
By Yellow Brick Road, I think, isn't it? Yeah.
I think so. And then at that point, I know it got sold. I mean, he sold it, or his studio, or whatever, and they sold it. Or they might have donated, I don't know, because that's where it dropped off, the trail drops off. Best educated guess is that it was donated to a school or something. And then they ended up selling it, or this or that, and it eventually ended up at that music around in Denver. I was just blown away about that. But I feel a little differently than some people when it comes to instruments versus the musicians, because it's the musicians making the music with that instrument. Just because Elton John touched it really doesn't mean that much to me, because he's the brains behind the music, not the keyboard. Not the keyboard's just his tool to do it. So I don't have that Rhodes anymore. I had it for years, but a friend of mine who owns another music place up in Austin, Texas, called Switched On, I ended up trading it to him for gear that I'd use more. Now I do still have Rhodes, and it's back over there, but the 88 was just too big. The 73 was too big. I have one of the rarer known Rhodes 54s, and it's a 54 key. It's small enough to put on a keyboard stand, but it's a real Rhodes.
Nice.
Yeah,
and do you have, when you get, is there a certain synth, or you mentioned like the memory mode, but is there certain synths or brands that you avoid, for having, known issues, or what you just don't like working on them?
I think I'd avoid a brand so much as a model. Like the memory modes, unless I found one for dirt cheap, I probably wouldn't look at it twice, just because, I know what's involved in restoring those, and how no matter how future-proof you make them, they're still going to have issues eventually. I hate to talk bad about it because it's a great synth, but I know from experience, that I saw somewhere online somebody was making replacement boards for it, and their goal was to make modern day replacements, correct circuitry, but made reliably, And I don't think they ever finished the project, which is a shame, because I would have kept a memory mode to swap all the boards out eventually with to do that, because then you'd have all that sound without worrying about an old, VCA or filter chip or something going bad inside, or the Demux board having an issue that you can't trace down. And it's a crazy design, but it was designed and built at the same time as the Source, the Moog Source keyboard. And that was original Moog's kind of last hurrah when they were facing their bankruptcy originally. So, there's horse glue literally, gluing the glued parts together on them. And it's a shame because they were finally heading in the right direction, but they were lagging. By 1983, you got the Source, which was archaic compared to, like the Teisco SX210, which was digital. It's analog, but it's digital controlled oscillators. Doesn't go out of tune. But it's all analog otherwise. It's like memory storage, all of that. And, Moog just kind of fell behind, I think, and that's probably what was really hurting them in the end. The original.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah.
If it's something I'm going to avoid, it'd be more of a model. And honestly, I can't think of anything off the top of my head that I would truly avoid, because some of the weird things people avoid are actually kind of cool in a weird way. I've hooked up my speak and spell in here before. Hello.
Yeah. And are there any that you're still on the lookout for that you've never been able to track down? Is there one sort of golden synth that you're still trying to find?
Well, I've had just about everything I've ever looked for. Art Odysseys and the Spectrum, keyboard, which inspired that keyboard with the light-up keyboards behind me.
Oh, that's cool.
I hand-built that. It'll run any VST. It'll wirelessly MIDI to anything with WIDI. In fact, right now it's wireless. The top red keyboard's wirelessly connected to that Moog rack mount through WIDI. But I hand-built that whole thing so that you could play anything, mix anything, play any MIDI with VSTs or whatever. And made it look good with the light-up keys. That was
excellent, yeah.
But I named it the Spectrum Synth, kind of in honor of the old one.
Yeah. So there isn't sort of one that you're still holding out, you're still not being able to track down?
Well, let me think here. The one thing that's been extremely elusive is this dumbest thing, and I just posted today in the groups looking, see if somebody knows where I can find one, is the music rest for the DX1. It's the same music rest on the DX1, 5, 7, and 9. And I think it even fits the 21 up there. And they used to be common as dirt, and now there's not one to be found anywhere.
Yeah,
And I bought the DX9. As mentioned earlier at the beginning of our interview here, that I bought the DX9 for the music rest. Well, long story short, they never shipped it, and they ended up refunding my money. So I literally bought it just for the music rest.
Yeah, so you're still on the lookout for that.
I'd have to think if there was a keyboard that I'd love to find. Well, there are keyboards I'd love to have that are rare, but I know I could get them, like the Ballerin, the River. That'd be a great synthesizer to have. And one keyboard I never thought I would have, I ended up with in a trade, and it's over here on the left, is the Schmidt 8-Voice. And that's probably more synthesizer than anybody would ever need. but it gets used, so it's good with me. It weighs like 300 pounds. It's it looks like a keyboard you could pick up till you try to pick it up and you realize it's extremely heavy.
And then, so I suppose if you were getting rid of everything and you could only keep one synth, which one of those would you keep?
My first SX240. That's a no-brainer
for
me. There's a multitude of reasons, and there's a multitude of keyboards that are better than it. But that keyboard, I know it's so inside and out, and it's so easy to program and so capable that if I could only keep one keyboard, all I would need is my computer to multi-track record it, and you can do a multitude of great things with it, because that's where I started, what I used originally. All my original songs are just that, and drum machine.
Yeah, we haven't really talked about drum machines, so are you a fan of drum machines? You mentioned the RX-5, but you're a fan of drum machines?
Some of them, yeah. I have the first thing that Roland ever made, and they weren't even Roland yet. They were known as Ace Tone. And, well, there's more to that story. We won't get into that one. But the first thing they made, as far as drum machine, I guess it was their first product, was the Ace Tone Rhythm Ace. And the model was FR1. And it's just a big accompaniment cha-cha box, if you will, that you set on your organ and you play with it. You know, you play your organ along with the rhythm. And it became famous in recent years. A band by the name of Gorillaz did a song. I can't remember the name of it. I want to see it's Human something maybe. But the song starts out with that rhythm, with the actual cha-cha rhythm from that rhythm box. I always thought it was cool how that band would take old things like that and integrate them into music. That's what I like to do.
Yeah.
But when it comes to drum machines, I've had quite a few. I mentioned my 4-track Yamaha system, you know, the cassette deal from the 80s that had all the accessories. Well, the accessories would be like the matching monitor speakers and the matching sub mixer and the patch bay. Now, there's two items that go with it that people didn't realize went with that set. It was known as the personal studio system. Well, one of them was the CS01 synthesizer, which is that little gray baby CS keyboard.
Yeah.
The other one was its matching drum machine, the MR10. And I have that little MR10, I have the whole system still. I could record 4-track if I wanted to. But that little MR10's, you know, it fits the usual CR78, you know, cha-cha box sounds, but it's got a kick drum that kicks. It really kicks. That's pretty amazing. And then I have both Teisco drum machines they made, which was the Rhythmer 1, R1A and an R3A, I think was the numbers, as well as the Digitact and the RX5. I have a Lin drum, the what is it? The can't think what it's called. No, the TR8S. And I also use other things for rhythm sometimes if I want to mix things in. Like I have a second Matrix Brute. They were on sale for $900 at Sweetwater. That's like $900. That's a really good keyboard for $900. So I bought another one. And I programmed it to do rhythms and stuff. So you get a unique sound that way. And then, of course, I have some rack mount modules, which aren't drum machines, but they make, you know, the percussion modules. You have to hook them up to some kind of sequencer or something, or pads if you want to play them by hand. You know, the Alesis A4, which is vintage, but it sounds really good. The Emu Percussion, that's another good one, and the Kawai XT5. So between all of them, I do a lot of mixing between them so that you can't really tell what, it's one drum machine or another. And of course the TR-8S, the RX-5, and the Digitech are sampling. Well, the RX-5's sampling if you buy the modern day card for the voice slot in it. You can dump samples into that card and dump them in the drum machine. There's a lot of neat factors there, but lately, my latest music, I've been working real hard to program drums that sound like you're really playing them. And it's all drum machine. But I've done this for decades, and I feel I've gotten pretty good at it now. So when you hear new songs come out, you'll hear it. We're going to debut the newest song. It's called Time Quest on the next month's upcoming music festival known as Clown Fest. So, next month, just search on YouTube for Clown Fest 14. And it's a 6-day long music festival.
Excellent. Actually, before we go, I might want to get your links as well, but I just got to mention you've got directly behind you there the MS-2000 rack. I've got my MS-2000 just behind me there, but it's a nice little synth. That.
Don't get rid of it. It's just. When you think about it, the thing is almost 25 years old, and it makes sounds that I can't get out of anything else. And I really use it for just 2 sounds that I custom made in it. And I've never been able to reproduce those sounds with any other piece of gear. So yeah, that's a great piece of kit, no question about it.
Yeah, I like mine, and I've had mine since 25 years. Yeah. So, well, it's been absolutely brilliant talking to you, Ron. I really appreciate you coming on the show, and it's been great chatting to you. So tell us, where can people go to find your music then?
Well, I'll get you the links here in a little bit. Easiest way to find us, of course, go on YouTube, search for Mystic Frequencies, click on my channel, or pick a video, you'll find me. Facebook, same thing, Mystic Frequencies. And I'm on all the other spots, Reverb Nation and Bandcamp, SoundCloud. I need to update those. They're getting behind. I just started a 24/7 streaming channel. So if you want to hear my best music, well, I think it's my best music, I'll get you that link too.
Brilliant.
And you can have that too, because you can just listen with the browser or your phone or the app.
Excellent. Yeah, I'll include those links in the show notes along with the show as well. That'd be brilliant. Yeah, it's been absolutely fascinating talking to you, and I think maybe in the future we'll do a deep dive into some of the synths, and maybe we could focus on a couple of synths. I think, but I really enjoy talking to you.
Absolutely.
So many thanks for joining me tonight, and we'll get in touch and we'll see you on a future show.
Appreciate it, Ian. Glad to be here.
Thanks to Ron, that was absolutely brilliant. Thanks to all our supporters on Patreon. All the links that Ron mentioned and the Patreon links are in the show notes. Next week, we'll have another interesting guest, another topic. Thanks for watching. See you on the next one.